I'll admit all. Let's go to the lobby. Admit all. There we go. So it should bring in Michael. Good morning, Richard. Morning, Simon. Morning, Nina. Morning, David. Morning, Nick. Good morning, John. Welcome to Pension Playpen. If you've just joined, if you could mute, that would be great. Good morning, Margaret. Good morning, Miles. If you've just joined, Nick, if you could mute, that would be great. Thank you very much. Just to cut out some background noise for whatever reason. John, hang on, let me just mute John. There we go. And just allow another minute or two for people to join. Admitting. Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Professor Bromwich. And good morning, Stuart. So lots of lovely faces.
Morning, Nico.
Morning.
Nice to see you. I know there are some others. Here we go. Some others that said they were joining and are now joining. So good morning, Adrian. Good morning, David. Good morning, Paul. Good morning, George. If you've just joined, if you could mute, that would be great, just to cut out some background noise, to allow Nico to speak. I'll mute you, Paul, if that's all right. Sorry. And we're nearly there. Go and Scott. Good morning, Scott. I'm going to mute you, Scott. So there we go. Good. Okay. Well, it's now 10:32, and welcome everybody to this week's Pension Playpen Coffee Morning. We're delighted to be joined by Nico Aspinall, and he's going to be in conversation with our esteemed chairman, Henry Tapper. As usual, we are recording the session for people that can't join today. So could we have a thumbs up from everybody, Chris and Margaret, that we're all happy to be recorded? That's fantastic. As usual, we would ask that if you have any questions, it's interactive, it's informal. And if you have any questions, just raise a hand. We'll also open the chat, so Henry, I, and Nico can look at the chat for any interesting comments. And as usual, we don't mind, obviously, to be challenging ourselves with some hard questions. So, you know, part of Pension Playpen is to be challenging ourselves, challenging the industry, and you know, challenging what we're doing every day going forward. So without further ado, I will pass over to Henry, and then Henry will introduce you to Nico. So I'll go on mute and pass you over to Henry.
Thanks very much, Steve. Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many and so many of the goods. Nico needs no introduction to you, I am sure. However, he may want to just say a few words about how he feels qualified to speak on this subject before getting going. So I'll hand over to him and allow him to explain.
Sure, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me. What a great attendance. And what did you call it? What a way of framing that, Henry, the great and the good, and great to see all of you. Yeah, look, so I won't do the kind of full CV, but I've grappled with kind of life platforms and custody platforms a number of times in my career. I actually dealt with a custody platform before I dealt with life platforms. So when I was at Barclays Bank, UKRF, so the staff scheme, we put in place a custody arrangement to move from direct to manager trading. So changing who we faxed, those were the days. That was 2009, I think, maybe 2010 when we put the custodian in place. So using that to do essentially a leveraged risk parity approach in the DC scheme. And then when I was at Towers Watson, obviously very much advising on schemes on really the IO life platform business. One of the first things I helped to arrange was moving people away from the Prudential fund platform, fund solution, PFS was it, and a block of business going onto the Fidelity platform, as was. And then, yeah, so when I got to the People's Pension, one of the initiatives that I started off, pretty quickly on, was to find a custody platform. So I wouldn't describe the State Street proposition, the life company there, as a platform. It was essentially a wrap of their own funds, but very much again trying to get the best in class for the People's Pension. So we completed that move at the end of 2018. So yeah, I've seen both sides of the market, and I'm here to talk about why I think custody is the side that we should be on.
Okay, well, I think it'd be great if you could just explain, for those of us who aren't as au fait with what custodians do, exactly what a custody platform is.
Sure. Yeah. So really, it's three businesses wrapped together. So there is a custodian. Custodian banks are the holders of assets. So they're the ones who make sure that your equity share certificates are looked after, and your bonds and your derivative transactions. There is a fund accounting function, which essentially makes sure on a daily traded basis, on a daily basis, that your accounts add up, and whatever level of complexity you want for your DC pricing hierarchy kind of works. And then you have a transfer agent. The transfer agent really is a function for commingled funds. So they hold the book of record in terms of the ownership of the units at the top level. Obviously, in DC schemes, really that's the member reporting, member recording system, record keeping system. So in DC, the use of the transfer agent is a bit of a moot point. But there might well be circumstances where they're useful. So yeah, it's a sort of package of all three. Really, if you're investing in life companies, those services are kind of carried out within the life company somewhere, because you need to hold the assets. You need to create a series of kind of hierarchical funds and places to hold them, to create the lifestyle strategy or the target date funds or whatever it is that you want. You need to account for those things, and you do need a transfer agent who's making sure that you understand who owns what units in those funds. So all of those functions are there within the life company, but so is a life company balance sheet. The critical piece here is that as a trust, as a defined benefit trust, there's nothing really that limits you in terms of what you can hold. Only fiduciary duty limits you. So if the trustees believe that holding an asset is good for the members, then they can. Whereas life companies are very much framed by FCA regulation and really retail-oriented regulation, and they face quite a lot of restrictions in what they can invest in. And that's the kind of critical difference with a custody approach versus life approach.
Okay, it's really interesting. But of course, a lot of life companies do actually manage assets on their platforms for DB schemes. And obviously most offer life platforms for DC schemes. So why is this a better way forward than the life route, which sounds simple and bundled and easy and not the kind of thing that even somebody as dim as me could mistake for being, a life platform?
Yeah, look, so and I can see Adrian's leaning forward. So I recognize that there is one different kind of provider in this market with Mobius. I'll come back to it. Maybe we ask Adrian to explain why they're different at some stage as well. But look, so a traditional life platform essentially is it's another mouth in the chain. So if you are at 20 billion and you're worried about the cost of passive funds, you have interjected another profit center into the value chain of investing in those funds. So just from a pure commercial perspective, that makes no sense to me. As you said, Henry, those platforms do invest in some illiquid assets, but or kind of interesting assets, but really not much. So if I look at the annuity books of the life platforms, of the life companies, then they do have some interesting assets, but obviously, Solvency II kind of limits how much they would have in that. But compared to a, maybe UK DB scheme is the wrong comparator, an international global peer, CPPIB, APP, one of the AP funds in Sweden, the big beasts, institutional investment, we have dramatically less illiquid, unlisted assets, and that kind of life platform, life layer is one of the blockers to that.
So
the
you're
DB
saying
schemes,
that life companies are stifling innovation and basically sort of stopping the flexibility that trustees would like to have to invest in illiquids and so on.
I think life platforms have been, secondary school. It's time we go to university. They're not stopping innovation. They're just for the small. They're just, if you're sub 2, 3, 4, 5 billion, it depends what you want to do with the platform, then they're the best solution. As you say, they take away a lot of the complexity of what we're talking about, and they do it in a very efficient manner. But they're the training wheels. We need to learn to ride the bike, right? So the biggest schemes are not using life platforms because they get in the way.
Okay, so if you're a scheme but is using a life platform and you say, oh, that Nico, he's suggesting I get myself to be able to ride this bike, what kind of things do you actually have to do to learn to ride the custody bike?
Yeah. And this is the critical piece, because at the moment, I think the in-house resources of master trusts, of DC schemes, are very light. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions that come with the move to custody. So, from an operational perspective, you've probably never checked a unit price because you've got a life company platform. From an audit perspective, that's odd, by the way, right? Why you would think that a life company is less likely to make mistakes than any other provider, I don't know. But just the transparency that you get and the ownership of the unit price that you take on as the trustee probably means that you need an operational team who's kicking the tires of the fund accountant and the custodian maybe a bit more rigorously than you do with the life company. So you need an operational team who's going to be thinking about how things price. That includes if an asset is stale. So if you trade in multiple markets, even if you're listed, if you trade in multiple markets, they have different bank holidays on different days. Who's got the discretion to say whether that price is on a bank holiday in Luxembourg when it's an open market day in the UK? How do you determine what that price should be? So those are all things that you can pre-configure and give to the fund accountant, but they're not going to have discretion in this process. So from an operational perspective, there's a lot that you need to be thinking about. How does your fund rebalance? You probably had a conversation with the life company about some tolerances, but you've probably not had the conversation about which asset, when, how much liquidity do you need to keep in the system? Is there a single bank account for all of your scheme? How do you apportion liquidity between some of your self-select range and your default? There's a lot of very interesting conversations that come out of the kind of moving from the black box to the kind of full solution. And, all of them, I think, present some opportunities. How do your spreads work? How does the pricing of unit trading actually reflect the underlying market? How does it reflect the growth of the funds? So is it, as you're growing, essentially you're charging all younger members and paying all older members to trade, because that's just the nature of building equity units, which become bond units, and the members who retire from the bond units. So is that fair? Those are open questions that trustees and fiduciaries, I think, should be actually grappling with. But it does take internal resources to go through that kind of looking glass.
Okay,
but then you're into a world of saying, so what am I going to do with it? So if I want a property portfolio, a real property portfolio, not REITs, then do I need an internal property team who's going to be managing it? Do I need an internal property implementation team who's going to be working with the custodian and the fund accountant to make sure that the flows are landing in the right place? So as soon as you're into the world of talking about the actual asset classes that might be enabled, then there's potentially an even bigger jump to go through there as well.
So you were talking about scale here, and is it a different set of scale parameters for DB and DC, or is it just generally you need, say, 100 million or 100 billion, or what is the number, and is it different for DB and DC? That's my question.
Yeah, it probably is different from DB to DC, I think. So DB, they don't have to account for stuff every day. Good practice might be to account for it on a monthly basis and create some management information, quarterly basis for the performance reporting into the investment committee. But really, it's only once a year that you're actually going to look at the value of your private equity funds and properties. And that's when you actually care. A DC scheme cares every single day. A DC scheme can make a mistake any single day of the trading year. So, I think there is a difference in scale. A DB fund maybe has a segregated account per manager. A DC fund might have target dated funds and have 80 at the top level, another 5, 6 underneath, different share classes, so charging members different amounts to be in different solutions. So potentially you're just from the number of funds that you've got, you're kind of putting that barrier, that kind of tipping point from cost perspective, higher and higher up. So yeah, I do think that probably it takes a larger DC scheme to make it cost effective than it would a DB scheme. And the other differences are then really around if you are overwhelmingly or 100% passive, then probably you kind of got the smallest operational set that you're bringing in-house. As soon as you're doing anything more actively, so whether that's dynamic asset allocation all the way through to hiring and firing active managers, setting up segregated accounts, there's a number of pieces you could get into. So like the least sophisticated is the wrong word, but the kind of least complex kind of operational design through to a CPPIB, the tipping point would be very different, I think, for each of those.
I mean, the value for money consultation that we're in at the moment talks a lot about scale and the advantages of scale, but it doesn't actually mention anything about platforms on there and so on. In your thinking about value for money, and I know you're doing a lot of it, witness your excellent podcasts, are you thinking, okay, we really ought to be introducing what the benefits of scale are through things like custody platform? Is that part of your mindset?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I guess my hope for the consultation is that the market will start competing on realized and prospective returns, and at a certain scale, the only way for you to compete on realized and prospective returns is to drive the efficiency and sophistication of your products, and that will result in you going into a custody platform. At the moment, the market doesn't compete on returns in DC. It just doesn't. That's shocking, but it doesn't. Partly because those returns have seemed so blooming easy to get, right? You just put your money in passive and the market, the central banks made the returns for you by throwing QE at it. But we're now in a high inflation, weaker growth environment. Maybe we'll start to see some winners and losers in the master trust sector, and for that to be important to employers. But at the moment, the only things that are important to employers are cost. So, one of the important things in the value for money consultation is the separating of the cost on administration and investment. And I think when you start to see essentially it's a 5 basis point budget that's being spent on investments, and it's achieving the same as everybody else's 5 basis points budget, but this 15-20 basis point budget is achieving better risk adjusted returns or out and out returns or whatever it is, then I think you could start to see a movement where they could compete on returns and up the costs, and then think about custody would be kind of a part of that. So I don't think it's explicitly part of the VFM consultation, but it's a hope of the market becoming actually competitive as a result of VFM.
Yeah, is there any evidence? Is there an evidence base to suggest that you're right? I mean, are there master trusts out there that can demonstrate that had they not been on a custody platform, they would not have been delivering the outcomes they are right now? Or is it too early to say?
Yeah, I think it's too early. I mean, the global peer group of big institutional state and DB schemes, I think suggests that it is only a matter of time before the DC industry sees the light. I don't know to what extent people can look at themselves compared to Nest and the People's Pension and kind of pick out the bones of where their life platform kind of got in the way of their returns compared to those comparators versus asset allocation. That's probably more important at the first level. But yeah, I do think that there's plenty of kind of global case studies and a number of consultants on a global basis who kind of take you through it. And I'm thinking of Keith Ambashire, who comes out of the kind of Canadian sector, and I'm sure a number of the Aussie super kind of conversations where effectively there is no platform as we would know it, provide great kind of case studies in there.
Yeah, I mean, having spoken to the DWP, they're still finding their feet on a lot of these issues, and they aren't super up to speed. They've got the FCA and the TPR in there, neither of whom have ever shown that they're sort of hugely expert on DC issues. I'm just wondering where the consultation will get its expertise from if it's not from you, Nico.
But there with us, Henry. I mean, what can I... But look, so there is a massive issue in DC, which is that very few people are that interested in it. Where does the brain drain kind of go to? If you're a smart person and you come out of university and you're motivated by pensions and DC pensions, I want to meet you, because realistically, this is something you discover or fall into. In the podcast, one of the questions we ask is, how do you get into pensions? And I think 9 respondents out of 10 have said by accident. Bless her, Sophia Singleton said, essentially, I wanted to be an actuary when I worked out that engineers were in the cold, how to use maths and stay in the warm. So, we've got a lot of politicization of DC and charges. I think we're in a position where it's almost impossible for anyone to charge more on the basis of a kind of projected improved return, because how on earth do you wear that politically? How on earth do you wear that commercially with the employer? The charge cap had the effect of saying to the industry, the passive market is better than both active and unlisted assets. I mean, that was a really weird kind of chilling effect on what people might see as the social role of pension schemes. They're just not performing it in the way that DB used to and other countries do still. So yeah, the kind of expertise in DC, it's really difficult. It's really difficult. There's a lot of vested interests in our industry. That's not an issue, because every industry has vested interests. But there are very few people who are, I call myself quasi-independent. I obviously have clients, views, but there's very few who kind of come, from a sort of clean slate, really. One of the things that Darren and I on the podcast keep calling for is a pensions commission. We kind of need to go back and build on, 2006-07 is a long time ago, and we need to kind of see how AE went, talk about things like value for money and the charge cap, consolidation, master trusts, post-retirement. All of these issues have been piecemeal legislation. Safe harbors. I'd love to talk about through retirement safe harbors, and maybe somewhere in that kind of whole big corpus of evidence and considerations that a kind of true cross-party pensions commission could resolve for a decade is the kind of life and custody world.
Okay, I'm glad we're coming back there, because I want to ground this conversation in this very high level of expertise you have on that. And it does strike me from what you're saying that there's a commercial advantage for larger master trusts in being able to create more headroom for themselves from a custody platform, which would enable them to get more for less and therefore the commercial imperative would be to disintermediate. Is that a fair estimation of why larger schemes would want to move to a custody platform, not necessarily for member outcomes or just for member outcomes, but for their own purposes as well?
Yeah. So, to give you a sense, as you kind of grow in scale, obviously you will have kind of fee reductions coming in through your kind of scale agreements with your investment manager. You can make a much steeper curve if they are essentially managing it on a kind of segregated basis, right? Segregated account basis. So they're your securities. You're responsible for pricing those securities, and you can have a much better commercial negotiation with the custody, fund accounting, transfer agency side, and then with the investment managers. One of the pieces that I feel I could have achieved with State Street and didn't, so I don't think I'm breaking any commercial confidences, is essentially getting to a fixed fee for management of the assets. Okay. So let's not price on percentage of assets. Let's just price on, it costs you £500,000 a year to run this. We'll give you 600 grand to give you some margin. That's it for the rest of all time.
Really interesting. There are 2 or 3 schemes now who are at the sort of 20 billion mark, I think. People's is one of them. Nest, Legal and General announced they break through the 20 billion mark this last week, and there's LifeSite as well. Are these schemes now at sufficient scale, in your view, to make it worthwhile them making the transition, if you like, or do you think that because they're a life company like Legal and General, it's going to be virtually impossible for them to do so? So is there an argument that a life company will move to a custodial platform at all?
Yeah, so Nest and TPP are doing this already. So LifeSite uses the LGIM investment only platform, and obviously so does the 2 L&G Master Trusts. We mustn't forget that they add it up, but there are 2 smaller ones. So when they come up and say they're number 3 in the market, they're really somewhere like 6 and 7. But that's nitpicking. So I think there is an argument for the life company platforms to come away from their own life solutions, particularly the way that say L&G does it as opposed to Mobius. So L&G essentially put their own balance sheet in your trust. So that attracts Solvency II capital. And by going away from, that approach, then I'm sure it would release reserves. It might increase cost. Particularly with someone like L&G, where the investment skill maybe sits in weird parts of the business, and you'd need to think about how it reports into the trustees and how you create the kind of master trust center of excellence for some of those operational pieces that we're talking about, and some of the investment skills. I think there are pieces for them to consider there. But without knowing a huge amount of Solvency II, my sense is that the capital requirements would be reduced for them moving to a custody account approach.
Interesting. And you mentioned Mobius. I mean, there are a couple of ex-Mobius people on this call, one of whom is me, and the other is Adrian, actually. But I think there may be others. Who knows? Would you like to say, I mean, stick your neck out here, Nico? You have actually mentioned Mobius a couple of times. How do you see they're a big player in the DC space now? How do you see them progressing?
Yeah, so as I understand it, Mobius have protected sales. So essentially, rather than it being the Mobius balance sheet in the trust, it is your portion of the Mobius balance sheet. So that just essentially means that you can't have, contagion risk. Now, how a DC scheme into the LGIM platform could essentially kind of risk other DC schemes, I think we'd have to think through some permutations, maybe those LTAFs that the government is encouraging them to launch. So essentially Mobius have, as I understand it, and maybe I'll look at Adrian to nod or shake his head, but there are essentially individual balance sheets for each of those clients within the Mobius life company. So that means essentially that you're in a place where you've kind of life wrapped a custody approach, and we're getting into some sort of quite technical pieces. So then, and alongside that, there is then essentially a non-life custody platform, kind of like what I've been describing. Now, what I don't really understand, and you know, I don't know if it's kind of current or future development for Mobius, is how do you have a fund which the member sees as one fund, but the underlying components are some components of that kind of life wrapped and kind of non-life wrapped bits. So something like, I mean, we should come on to LTAFs, right?
We will come on to LTAFs, yeah.
But so in terms of unlisted assets, the only way that you can put listed assets through a life platform, sorry, unlisted assets, a large proportion of unlisted assets through a life platform is through an LTAF. You know, that is wrapping down a level, then the custody approach would enable a trust. So potentially the Mobius structure would enable you to have those unlisted assets in the kind of non-life bit. But what I don't understand is essentially how those two units come together to the thing that the member receives. So that's maybe a kind of development piece there. It's ultimately, my hypothesis is that, you know, as I say, when you're at that level that you were talking about, so the 20 billions, you don't need any of that kind of life side content. So I'd hope Mobius are able to kind of build out that non-life side, and see that as the, you know, there's a sort of intermediate that the life protected cell business approach kind of offers an intermediate stepping stone from the kind of life platform. You go through that Mobius, your own balance sheet, and then maybe a Mobius, you know, non-life custody account type approach.
Could you say very briefly a little bit about permitted links and LTAFs so that people can understand what kind of choices are out there and how all this fits together?
Yeah, God, this is stuff that I have put in my brain and then I kind of allow to leak out from time to time. So look, so permitted links are essentially a series of rules written by the FCA, which are to protect retail investors from investing in stuff that is either let's say well, dangerous in terms of not performing, or illiquid. So those retail rules essentially say, and the rules have slightly changed, but it needs to be readily realizable, used to be the old language, which nobody knows exactly what it means, but it's a sort of test which says, if I try and sell it, is there a buyer? So the rules have evolved over, you know, periods of time, partly because the government keeps on getting very frustrated by the existence of life platforms but not wanting to get rid of them, so has been kind of tweaking these permitted link rules. The latest tweak is to say that there's a thing called an LTAF, which is the long-term assets fund. Schroders announced their, I think, successful application for their product, which will go into the Cushion Master Trust yesterday, the day before. So the LTAF is a vehicle structure specifically designed for DC pensions, which enable those retail, and it should be said, savings rules to be kind of bent so that you can put some illiquid assets into the defaults of DC schemes. So
you've got quite a small master trust in terms of assets relative to Nest or Life Sites, in Cushion, but it's pioneering the use of LTAF in conjunction with Mobius, is it?
Yes, you'll have to tell me.
I believe that Mobius
a nod from Adrian.
Investment platform. Anyway, we're really pushing hard on Adrian here. He's not on the call as a contributor, so we won't. And he is ex Mobius, but I'm sure he's listening with interest. What it seems is that there is an awful lot of activity going on in certain spaces in the industry, and not a lot of activity going on in others. Would that be a fair estimate? There are people out there pushing hard for this stuff, and there are other people who are saying, well, actually it's tomorrow's problem, and so on. And a great deal of concentration around, 2 or 3 master trusts who seem to be doing
Yeah.
most of the heavy lifting. That's my observation anyway. Would that be?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we've got to come back to cost. So unlisted assets are more expensive to manage. If you own a building, then you've got to pay someone to find the tenants, collect the rent from the tenants to repair the building. And, we're in a world where you just compare that to passive, FTSE, MSCI gives you an index and you just try and replicate it as well as you can. That's desperately cheap at scale. If you have 100 buildings, you don't get a massive cost efficiency. Once you've got a team, you've got a team, and you have to make the buildings, the team scale with the number of buildings and assets you've got. So we're in a world where cost is king, performance is essentially irrelevant, and nobody differentiates between that superstar active investment manager and those wind farms because they both cost more. So yeah, until we can kind of separate performance more clearly, get people to value spending money in investment and financial services. I mean, that's not necessarily my plea. We've got a terrible track record in financial services of ripping people off. But absolutely putting the sector into prison is cutting your nose off to spite your face. So there has to be more than nothing. And until we get those kind of norms changing, and I think the VFM consultation does stuff, then yeah, we're only going to see a few people out ahead who maybe have a social purpose that they want to talk to and use that kind of custody approach to do the kind of unlisted sustainable assets that Nest and Cushon have been doing. Or in the case of the People's Pension, really to recognise that as a not-for-profit with no shareholders to go and tap up, you need to drive the cost as efficiently as possible to derive the best member outcome. So there will be some highlights, I think, in the market who will continue to push on. I mean, I wrote that thought piece in December, I think, and there are some interesting master trusts and owners of master trusts who have contacted me to discuss it. There are some life companies who are wondering whether they got it stuck in a bit of a cul-de-sac using a life platform when there's no cross subsidy from that or cross sell from that to the rest of their book. So I can see this being one of the topics, but if the next wave of re-enrollments and employers seeking to find new schemes just pushes the price down further, then that will push out the custody conversation again.
Okay, that's interesting. Perhaps you touched on something which is my final question, which is that there is sort of a social purpose to a lot of pension schemes now. ESG is obviously something which everyone talks about being embedded. Does moving to a sort of custodial approach actually make achieving the aims behind ESG easier for an organization?
So I guess there's a side question, which is your desire for control. So to the extent that you go to the investment management market and you're not satisfied, possibly with the price that you can pay, some combination of the value for money on sustainability of the investment market, then yes, absolutely. It puts you in the driving seat. So if you define implied temperature rise or your climate transition planning looks different from the managers you can find, and when you tell them that you're not large enough or you can't make them change, then yeah, absolutely. I would hope that over time there are solutions that would, for the mass market on the climate transition, all but those 3 or 4 or 5 who are big enough, that they can be picked up, that you can find that managers will start to launch appropriate, whether it's LTAFs or, funds, GPLP structures that those schemes can invest in. So, yeah, I do think that there is, really we're talking about desire for control. That comes from investment beliefs, which essentially says, and again, coming back to that kind of global peer group of big institutions, the better the trustees think through things with their advisors, with their internal team, the better they kind of drive through how markets are going to profit members and improve outcomes, the better they need to have their operations so they can express those views. If you go to that kind of global peer group of big institutions, they have that belief set, and as a result, climate change, ESG is sort of just a part of that. But that kind of belief set of, it is right that the universities' pension schemes think differently to the railways' pension schemes because they have different priors of what the benefit is for the industry that it comes from, and therefore potentially the sectors and the way that they'd approach different sectors, even through the climate transition. Those are valuable in that kind of global industry peer group. And ESG is just one of the number of topics that, if you have those beliefs, you can achieve better.
I guess what you're saying is also touching on stewardship. That if you directly own assets on a custodial platform, you've got a greater capacity to actually influence the behaviours of the asset managers.
Yeah, absolutely. And the companies. So it could be that you directly hold the share certificates and, you get involved in Climate Action 100 or whatever, and you're selected to be the one who goes and speaks to Shell about how they're progressing on climate change, or, name any other company in the world, Tesco's, or, could be anyone. So it could be that your belief set leads you to be the one who kind of represents the industry, the global financial industry, in kind of addressing and engaging with individual company.
Okay, so I think I've covered my questions to you, Nico, but I think one thing you said kind of like stuck out, which is you're saying moving to a custody platform is a bit like learning to ride a bike. And I like that analogy because it is hard to do when you're young, but once you've done it, it's something that stays with you and you never want to stop doing it. So I get what you're saying. Having said that, quite a lot of people won't be at that maturity that they want to ride a bike or even can ride a bike. So yeah, okay, good. I'm going to throw this open to questions now, conscious of the fact that we haven't had a lot of questions so far, other than a few from me. So if you want to speak now, put your hand up. We'll try and grab you. I'm just going to have a look and see if there's any chat which is going on.
Yeah, so Chris has asked me a very technical question on the FCA.
Okay, would you like to address that question, Nico?
No, I would not.
Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Chris.
Yeah.
Okay, look, do you want to ask that question before I come to Adrian?
So it was an observation, really. It was the fact that actually the FCA, I think a couple of 2-3 years ago, actually changed the rules on illiquids, which allowed you to have up to 35% in illiquids in a unit-linked fund. So I think, and that's separate from the LTAF concept. So I think, a lot of what's being, my observation is a lot of what's being talked about here is, getting the sort of diversification and even customization that you want is probably possible through the life route. It's more to do with the fact that very few providers have either the capability on the platform or the appetite for risk or customization that's needed to actually provide the kind of service that you would get from a custodian bank, and it is very much a scale thing as well.
That's Nico.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd be unlikely to find a trustees who wanted 100% unlisted assets, but a trust could, in theory, if it felt it's got a liability payment profile which enables that, go that far. Those 35%, I think the critical question will be around some of the GPLP structure, as to whether life funds would allow that. And then, Solvency II, obviously there's the Edinburgh reforms that Jeremy Hunt got very excited about. and we could spend a lifetime talking about Solvency II, and I'd still know less than most people in the industry. So there is a lot of technical bump that comes into the trust-based world from life platforms. And really, one of the other things I've argued for is we should have two regulators. We should recognize that trust-based is for trusts and FCA is for retail, right? I mean, that's great.
We won't go down this rabbit hole because we where it will lead to go.
I'm just poking. I'm just poking.
Yeah. Adrian, you did have your hand up. Do you want to jump in here? Because I know you know a bit about Solvency II.
And that's more than I would ever thought I would have liked to have done when I left university, going back to Nico's earlier comment. I was just going to make a couple of observations. Okay, I think there is certainly a place for life company platforms, and there's certainly a size and expertise level that you require to do it yourself, if you like. There is comfort. I think trustees get comfort around a life company platform, usability, simplicity, and some of the expertise that is provided by life companies. Especially, I'll refer to Mobius, but I to be clear, I'm no longer at Mobius. You talk about product availability. Now, regulation evolves, and certainly since I've been involved with Mobius, that's 12 years. There's significant change in terms of what you can do on a life company and the ability of some organisations to do off life co, on life co, as you mentioned. But I think the three, you mentioned property funds, you mentioned derivatives, you mentioned paying for passive. I happen to know that Mobius has zero fee passive funds, that has derivative overlays, delivers property funds as well. I think Mobius is a bit different. It's independent, okay, and can work with any fund managers. And what that enables is for a fund manager access potentially to almost 1,000 schemes. Yeah, they're small schemes, but they're difficult to get access to if you're going to go to them individually. And that actually enables Mobius to work with fund managers to drive innovation, to bring solutions to smaller schemes that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get access to because they don't have the in-house expertise and security that obviously the larger schemes had. And obviously, as we move towards more master trust, larger DC single trust schemes, there'll be more of a demand for more technical solutions. So I can see the trend, but I think especially for DB, small DB, actually the live platform solution is pretty efficient. And you say DB isn't a daily thing. Well, go back to September last year. I think in LDI it was fairly daily. So things can happen. And the reason why you have this regulation is to provide a layer of comfort for the trustees of schemes who perhaps are not what we might deem as professional, if you like, in terms of, it's not their day job. So I think I hear what you say, and I agree with an awful lot of what you say. But I think life platforms do have an advantage in many ways in terms of the type of people who want to use them, like them. And I think they'll be here, and regulation will evolve to make them, to enable them to do more rather than less within a controlled framework.
Yeah, I guess there are one or two trustees out there cursed the day they ever heard of the pooled fund after last September, but they're in the minority. And of course, pooled funds are the things that have kept most DB schemes, manageable over the last 30 or 40 years. And of course, a pooled fund is a life fund, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm not arguing against DB and life, right? I mean, everybody needs life insurance, and I use life funds in my my savings, right? That's fine. I agree with a lot of what Adrian said, and all of what Adrian said. I think the one comment I'd make is that obviously the government hopes that all of those DC small schemes cease to exist. So that evolution of the market, they hope that those non-professional trustees cease to look after DC pots. They hope that value for money will drive consolidation. They haven't named a number, but how many schemes do they hope exist, right? 20, 30, 40? It's not going to be 100. They hope that, it will be on the basis of investment performance competition that that consolidation is driven, as opposed to cost out and out. So, yeah, all of those trends, I think, will drive away from the kind of solution is an artifact of an external to the trust, whether it be manager, consultant, operation through platform, to solution is an internal to the trust. It's that internal team dealing with those people and talking to what's possible. And you're starting to see that it's some of the places into the DC master trust sector.
Could you put a number on it and say, okay, I've got 20 billion. What would I want to be seeing in terms of extra performance from a move from a life to a custody basis? Would it be a couple of basis points, or would it be 5? Or
from performance?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, from cost, you probably are talking about couple of basis points at that stage. So assuming you do nothing different, then you've got that in the bag.
That's your cost saving. Yeah, but in terms
but that
of
comes somewhere through to the member, right?
Value improvement. I mean, how much extra value do you think you would be looking to drive out from all the things you've been talking about so far, the control aspects, and so on? Yeah, where is the big win on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably is that climate change, social role of the pension scheme piece. So I don't think you're going to see it in the next 5 years, but I think you're going to see what they called, the PRI call the inevitable policy response, and then a lot of the private assets that you might be building up in this approach in wind farms, other bits of infrastructure for the climate transition, I think could become very valuable very rapidly. So yeah, I don't think so the beliefs as to can you improve risk adjusted returns will come as much from having an internal team investing in the essentially more dynamic asset allocation and a bigger kind of toolbox in terms of investment universe. So those are all sorts of intangible against the kind of life, non-life, because there's probably a bigger hurdle in terms of getting trusts to believe that they can do that stuff. But yeah, I do think there'll be a big repricing of sustainability assets as and when that governments realise we're on a path to 4 degrees and we have to hit the transition much faster.
Okay. Hands up, Chris. I see you got your hand up again, so fire away, sir.
That was just in relation to what the question you just asked, Nico. I mean, I'd have thought that the main conversation point that we're having here and coming onto the LTAFs is providing access to private markets, and it's those allocations which you expect because of the illiquidity premium you expect for all of the other reasons which are trotted out in DB investing are going to give you, incremental return relative to their public market equivalents. I think it was it on a Hyman's seminar recently, they were talking about this 10-10-10 or something, which was, 10 basis points of increased cost at give you a 10% allocation, which gives you a 10% additional return over the long term. Now, I have no idea if that's accurate. It was quite nice and catchy, right? But that's how I would have thought you're thinking about it. And then the question is whether or not, if you're sticking with the unit-linked life model and you're thinking about your alts coming through the LTAF piece, whether or not that's going to give you a commensurately increased return as you would get if you're going to the custody platform.
It's very interesting to hear you mention the consultants. Are the consultants actively pushing a move from the bigger master trust towards directly held assets?
So the consultants really don't have the client base of the bigger master trusts. So they might be kind of in the sounding board list.
Hyman's advises Legal and General.
Oh, well, do they? I mean,
Well,
I don't think I'm breaking
they
any
do.
huge confidences to say that the Legal and General brain doesn't engage with Hyman's. Legal and General trustees hear the results of the Legal and General brain and ask Hyman's whether they're onside or offside, right? So I don't think the trustees of Legal and General are saying, what can we do for the best interests of members with a budget that we have full discretion to spend, and then engage Hyman's as to how to put liquid assets in as a result of that. I think L&G decide how to invest. Okay. And we may well, in that pensions commission, I'm gonna say it's 2030, right? Because nobody seems to be reacting. Need to look at how providers and shareholders direct the trustees to invest. There's a huge can of worms. But you know, we demutualized our industry a long time ago. One of the big success factors, the big question in Australia is, are you part of a trust which is essentially mutual, or are you part of a retail trust? Is someone taking a profit from you? Because if you do, you're going to make a 1% per annum less. That is just very, very easy. You can box the Australian market into two. And we have only really got one or maybe two mutuals, depending on how you kind of argue it. So I could see that, you know, a future date, we need to talk about the influence of the providers, the influence of the marketing budget in determining asset allocations.
That's so interesting, Nico. And I'm afraid we're sort of coming towards the end of this session. So I'm going to throw it out. If you want to ask Nico a question about what he said today, or about anything else that matter, now is your opportunity. So you've got to stick your hand up or take yourself off mute and talk, because we're going to be closing this call down in a second. Okay. Well,
Andrew Stalker Henry's made a comment regarding. There he is.
Hello, Andrew. Hi.
You're on mute, Andrew.
You're on mute.
Yeah, it was more of a comment, Henry. You mentioned about I think it was you, Henry, about the life funds and LDI. And I said, actually, the LDI ones were typically, because they're DBs, held by DB schemes, they're actually typically under ACE. But while I'm on, I don't know if I'm opening another can of worms, Nico, you mentioned LTAFs. My personal view on this, it seems to, I think the phrase has often been used, it's a solution in search of a problem. The problem seems to be all of its own making by restrictions within DC wrappers. So rather than saying actually DC wrappers can invest in other things, they seem to have gone off and created this new wrapper instead. I mean, do you know the background to that? Wouldn't it have been easier just to increase the flexibilities that live companies have in terms of these assets?
Well, live companies not incentivized to extend their balance sheet into a liquid asset.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so fundamentally, why would I allow you to, as a client of mine, to misprice my balance sheet for 6 months?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So it is the existence of the life company in this chain, I argue, that is the awkwardness. And Adrian is different, Mobius is different, but the life balance sheet here is just really awkward.
Mm-hmm.
The DC scheme can do whatever it wants,
mm-hmm.
Because it's a trust.
Yeah.
It may not have a trustee set that knows that, and I've had hilarious conversations. You have to trade every day. No, you don't. There's nothing in the, you might have written that into your trust deed and rules. There's no regulation that imposes that. So we've gone very far down a very strange pathway, where, we do need some brave trustees and organizations to turn back and realize that the groupthink of the industry in going through the productive finance working group and coming out with the LTAFs is amazing. It will be a case study in business schools and policy schools for years to come. How to get, number 11 to tell you what the solution is before asking what the industry is, and getting the industry to basically not, do anything with the solution. I'm sure somewhere the Conservative High Command is jumping up and down with delight that they don't have to kill people in the Treasury for launching LTAFs now that we've announced that there's 1, 2, 3 coming, right? But will there be the 100 that we need to deliver illiquid assets? No. I mean, no, that just won't be. Yeah.
Well, maybe in time. Steve, I can see you appearing on the screen. I'm going to wrap
well,
up.
actually, I want to before I close. Obviously, it's very topical. We've got the great and the good here. There is talk on the BBC today and various other parties talking about the change to the lifetime allowance tomorrow. Does anybody have an opinion? The BBC are talking about 1.8 million, which is a massive jump. But do we agree or disagree with that as a final sort of question to the great and the good?
Wouldn't mind it for myself.
Peter?
Yes, there's an open DB scheme with history of in the public sector. It will be helpful to us if that is achieved. But
it's an interesting one. How's it going to play with the Conservative Party? How's it going to play with the Labour Party? How's it going to play with the general public? Tax perks for the rich? Anyone?
Well, the angle, Henry, the angle seems to be doctors. It seems to be trying to stop doctors early retiring or reducing their hours. So it's perhaps a timely change for.
More timely 2 years ago, I suspect.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true.
I mean, but ultimately, an input tax allowance and an output tax allowance, it doesn't make any sense to me.
No, I agree with you there.
Give me one or the other. I guess we can haggle over the level, but like having both, just bizarre.
Okay.
Yeah, totally agree.
Andrew and Peter, you both got your hands up. Did you want to add anything to that?
I think my hand was up by accident. I hadn't taken it down from last time, but yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and oddly enough, after the May budget, I was chatting with my friends and saying if they want to announce an item that could have been, if you like, sold better rather than the removal of the bankers' bonus caps and so forth, they could have gone for this one, which, as you say, it could be sold as a benefiting doctors and so forth.
We'll see. Well, we'll wait and see what the Chancellor actually says tomorrow.
Thank you, Andrew.
Might be saying something about annual allowance. We might be saying something about something we don't want him to say something about.
Yeah.
There's plenty of things he could pull out of that particular hat. Well, yeah, I'm conscious of time. I'm conscious that we have a tremendous group of people on the call. Thank you very much indeed to everyone, and thanks very much indeed for Nico's brilliant contribution today. It's been so interesting and thought-provoking. And then anyone who goes away from here and hasn't in the back of their head a question about whether their assets should be on a custodial or a live platform, was perhaps or their schemes assets, perhaps missing a trick. There we go.
Thank you, Nico. Fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nico.
And thanks to everyone for joining today. Thanks to Henry. Thanks to Nico. Thanks for your questions. Next Tuesday is going to be, I think, another interesting debate. Death of the IFA. Long live the IFA. So this follows a number of comments made in recent playpen events where bridging the gap on advice and how do you get advice to the masses. Is the IFA dead, or is the IFA going to be able to change their model? So that's going to be next Tuesday with Simon Crystal from WPS. So hopefully you can join that. So if you're not on Playpen yet and you're not a member, please join. If you like Playpen and you are a member, please invite others to join. We are growing steadily, which is fantastic. So thank you very much indeed. And as we always say, we pray for peace in the East. And it's now over a year. So, wow, amazing. But thanks, Nico. Really, really appreciate your time. And thanks, everyone, for dialing in. Have a good rest of the day and rest of the week. So take care. Thanks very much. Bye.
Good luck at Cheltenham, everyone.
Good luck at Cheltenham. Yeah. Thank you, Henry.